Welcome to One Off Coder. I'm Dr. Vang. Today, we'll be coding a guessing game using HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. As you can see here, we have a title followed by some instructions for the user to follow in order to play our game. There's an input box where the user may enter numbers between 1 and 10, and a submission button for the user to submit the guess back to the computer. The point of the game is to see if the user can guess correctly the number that the computer will generate. Here, we are using VS Code or Visual Studio Code to code our game. To the left, you can see the two files we will need to code our game. The Boing MP3 file will be the sound effect played when a user has guessed correctly what the computer generated. The index.html file stores our HTML, CSS, and JavaScript code. Our HTML is very simple. We have the standard HTML, head, and body tags. Inside the head tag, we have our title. We also have an external reference to the animate CSS file. Lastly, the head also contains our JavaScript. Remember the mental model. In web programming, HTML codes our content, CSS codes the style, and JavaScript codes the behavior. The body is where the meat of our HTML elements live. We have an H1 tag to show off our game title. We have two P tags to tease the user into playing our game and also give instructions on what to do. The input tag is where the user will enter a number. The button tag is what the user will press to submit the guess to the computer. Notice the button tag calls JavaScript code, in particular the check guess function. Below, we have two divs. One div will display the answer of the computer if needed. The other div will display the score. Lastly, there is an audio tag to reference the Boing MP3. Take note that we have added ID attributes to some of these HTML elements as we will need to reference them later from the JavaScript. Though typically not the case, our CSS is very simple. It simply references animate CSS. The most difficult part of our game is the JavaScript code. Let's go slow to go fast. First, we need state variables. State variables are used to keep track of our scores and total number of guessing tries. We also have a state variable to keep track of the last used animation effect, which is initialized to -1. Our first function, getRandomNumber, generates a number from 1 to 10. The getRandomEffect function generates a number between 0 and 5, inclusive on both ends, so as to randomly select a CSS effect. Note that we use a while loop to always select an effect that is not identical to the last one used. The checkGuess function is what we call when the user hits the guess button. First, we must check to see if the user entered anything. If not, we simply return. If the user entered a value, we convert that value to a number. We then ask the computer to generate a random number. Our feedback to the user will be stored in the message variable. If the user's guess and the number the computer randomly generated are equal, then we modify the message and increment the score by 1. If the user's guess is different from what the computer generated, we will let the user know that they've guessed incorrectly and expose what the computer generated. Each time the user enters a guess, we always keep track of how many tries the user has made. Now that we have our message and score, we update the HTML content of the answer and score divs. Before we leave the checkGuess function, we do a final check between what the user guessed and computer generated. If the numbers are equal, we call the playBoing function and animate the effects of the score div. Finally, we have a playBoing function where we play the MP3 file associated with the audio element. We have a fully working game coding in HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. What more could we do with this code? How might we improve it? Your imagination, knowledge, and practice of coding will determine success in different ways to improve this game. The full code is open source and in the link below. Remember, President Abraham Lincoln said, "The best way to predict the future is to create it." Here at One Off Coder, we say, the best way to create the future is to code it. Be healthy, happy, and successful. Keep learning and growing. Keep coding.